What if Rika ate Sukuna? What exactly would happen? Let's talk about it, but spoilers beware. All right, so first of all, shout out to David for asking me about this today, and specifically, he wanted to know what would have happened had Rika eaten Blob Kuna at the end of the series. Would Yuta have just copied the shrine technique, or could he have potentially possessed Rika? Okay, this is a really interesting question because there's a whole lot of variables here, and we don't really know how they would interact. And that's mostly because we don't really know what Rika is anymore. Because if you recall, at the end of JJK 0, the real Rika just passed on, right? They unraveled the curse and her soul moved on. But we know that she left behind Rika to still serve Okotsu, which is why he still has Rika even past JJK 0. But what exactly is that version of Rika now? Because it doesn't feel right to call her a true vengeful cursed spirit anymore, but nor does it feel right to call her just a straight up Shikigami. She's kind of just some weird entity that's hard to classify. But regardless of what Rika actually is, I don't think there's any universe where she could become a vessel for Sukuna, because we know that Sukuna can only possess humans. He can't possess cursed spirits, and that's why we see finger bearer curses. Those are cursed spirits that have come into contact with one of his fingers, and they just get transformed and become more powerful. But Sukuna is not piloting this thing, or nor does he have any agency over it whatsoever, right? And presumably we only saw very weak cursed spirits become finger bearer curses. So it is interesting to think about, like, what if a more powerful curse had absorbed a finger, like a Jogo or a Mahito or Rika from Jujutsu Kaisen 0. And to me, with them already being so powerful, I don't think they would be transformed like this. Maybe they would, who knows? But I would imagine they would just get like a bolster to their power or something like that. So in my opinion, if Rika had eaten Sukuna at the end of the series, I think Yuta would have copied the shrine technique and nothing else would have happened. Because that seems to be what Sukuna believes would happen, and he's the greatest jujutsu genius in the series, right? So I'm going to lean on his understanding. Because when he thought that Yuta used Cleave against him, well, Yuta did use it, but he's like, wait, this is my technique. When could he have copied it? And he's like, oh, Rika must have eaten the final finger. So he wasn't surprised that Rika hadn't gone through a transformation or that he wasn't able to, like, possess her or anything. He's like, oh, they just copied my technique. So I think that's all that would happen. And then speaking of Sukuna's vessels and Yuta and Rika, I got a few more questions on these subjects, starting with a couple here from Ninja. And the first one is, what if Mahito had been Sukuna's vessel? And like I said at the start of this video, cursed spirits can't be Sukuna's vessel, but this is still a really fun what if that I actually talked about last week. So I'm going to link you the video I made on this, but it would be bad for everyone. A Sukuna Mahito just wipes the verse. And then Ninja hit me with another scenario, which was, what if instead of swapping into Gojo's body, he had had Rika eat Gojo's body in order to copy his technique? And through the use of a binding vow, also copied the 6 Eyes and Gojo's basketball-sized domain expansion. And this is a fun scenario, but I will say I don't think this is actually possible within the series. I don't think that he could copy the 6 Eyes like that, but there is an interesting precedent to point to from Jujutsu Kaisen 0 with the real Rika, because we know when he copied Cursed Speech back in JJK 0, before he had the same restrictions and requirements that he does now, when he used cursed speech, he manifested the Inumaki curse marks on his face and tongue, right? Which maybe that could be somewhat equivalent to manifesting the 6 Eyes as a physical trait. We don't know, but in any case, that was JJK 0 Rika, and I do not think current Rika is capable of something like that. But let's just say, for the sake of this scenario, he does. So he copies the 6 Eyes, the technique, and the basketball domain, right? What would be different, Ninja wants to know. And I think the main thing here is that Yuta would not have Gojo's refinement in the domain anymore. So even though he's got the Limitless and the 6 Eyes, unless we just want to assume that passively gives him a bonus on his domain refinement immediately, like with no training, I think he just loses the domain clash against Sukuna now. But yeah, I mean, I guess that would honestly just be lights out. But if we want to assume that for whatever reason his refinement would be equal to Sukuna's, then the main difference is that he now has Rika and all of his other copied curse technique swords in that domain clash to use against Sukuna. So I do think that he would likely be able to destroy or do enough damage to Sukuna before Sukuna's domain destroyed his from the outside, which means they probably would just win the fight right then and there during that domain clash. Next up, continuing on the Yuta train, I got a couple of follow-up questions here from Otsukare on a recent video where I talked about what if Yuta had been there during the Shibuya incident. So he says, let's make this more fun and say that Culling Games Yuta was with Gojo, and they make it to floor B5 against the Disaster Curses. And the first thing I want to say is that this isn't possible, which is why I didn't include that in my scenario. And that's because, well, it's for two reasons, really. The first is that Gojo fights best alone, right? He's not going to want to bring Yuta with him into that situation. But more importantly, the barrier prevented anyone besides Gojo from entering it. So Yuta could not have gone with Gojo. Unless we want to say that, like, he had said, hey, Gojo, wait here until we can take down this barrier and then we'll go together. Then they could have gone together, but I just don't see that realistically happening. Like, Gojo isn't going to wait because he's not afraid. And again, he works best alone anyway. So yeah, I don't think it was possible for Yuta to be there with him. But in the spirit of talking about this scenario anyway, let's just say that he was with him. I think this honestly goes worse for Gojo because if Yuta's there, Gojo's not opening that 0.2 second domain, I don't think. I don't think he would do that to Yuta, even if he would recover in a couple of weeks or whatever the case, right? I just don't think he takes that risk. And on top of that, we know that that whole situation was designed for as much collateral damage to prevent Gojo from opening the domain. And Gojo's a bit more cold than Yuta, at least at this point in the story especially, right? So as much as Gojo's hands were tied, Yuta's would be even more so tied. Like, he would be afraid to hurt all of these civilians around, especially summoning Rika to do stuff, right? So both of them are going to be handicapped. And, you know, at this point, you know, not that Yuta's a slouch, but it takes just one or two tags from Mahito and he's done for, right? So honestly, I think this would have been worse and Okotsu probably would have died and Gojo's still been sealed. And then Otsukare says, what if Yuta went with Maki and that crew? And this is another like massive ripple effect, right? But in general, I think he would have, you know, made things way, way easier for that crew. Like, I think they beat Dagon pretty easily with Yuta being there. But then we know that Jogo and Toji are going to show up, right? So Toji would have maybe knocked Yuta away instead of Megami, as Yuta would have been the more formidable presence. Which if that happens, then Jogo shows up and everything probably goes the same way it did with him torching everybody. But if Toji still goes for Megami for whatever reason, and then Yuta has to fight Jogo, this all depends on what Yuta had to use in his fight with Dagon, right? Because if Yuta's already used his 5 minutes with Rika and his domain expansion, then he's going to be in trouble against Jogo. But if he didn't have to use that against Dagon, hopefully he can use it here. And like, who's more refined, Jogo or, you know, Shibuya Yuta? Hard to really say, but I think that would be a hell of a fight for him. That hopefully he could win. And then finally, Kraft asked me, what if Yuta had stayed behind instead of Choso to fight Kenjaku with Yuki? And this is tough because, like, I do think Yuta is way stronger than Choso and has a lot more in his bag comparatively that they could throw at Kenjaku to, you know, hopefully get the win here. But at the same time, you know, they still wouldn't be able to use the domain because that was their entire strategy, right? They were trying to bait out his domain so that Tengen could mess with it. But even if Yuta used his domain, I think Kenjaku's is far more refined and he would win a domain clash, which would then put Yuta on burnout and spell bad news, right? So, like, in my heart, I want to say that amongst Yuta's copy techniques, they would probably be able to figure out something like, you know, curse speech, don't move, Yuki hits him with 1,000,000 pounds to the face or something. So maybe they could beat him, but I wouldn't count Kenjaku completely out. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Kenjaku just had to, you know, go next level, pull out more pull out more tricks from his bag in order to take them out. So, like, I think Kenjaku could beat Yuki and Yuta at this point in the story, but they would obviously have a better shot with Yuta compared to Choso, and I could see them beating him. And then Kraft said, what if Megami had stayed behind and used Maharaga as a last-ditch effort to deal with Kenjaku? And I don't think Kenjaku has a reliable way to take out Maharaga, so I think this would work, and they would kill Kenjaku. However, everyone else there is going to die as well, because I think he would be forced to bring in Yuki or Yuta, whoever was there as his partner, as part of the ritual as well. But he probably wouldn't have even summoned Maharaga until after they were dead. So I think they'd kill Kenjaku, but at the cost of everyone's life that was there. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one. As always, thank you guys for watching.